Good morning, Rotarians.
Good morning, George.
We have a twofer this morning. Our speaker, Jim Weissman, was originally set to appear on March 15th as part of Technology Month, but a snowstorm had other ideas. Today, instead, he will kick off Health and Wellness Month, and his credentials remain equally valid. Jim, you see, is CEO in residence at BioEnterprise, which Crane's Cleveland business calls Cleveland's hotspot for biomedical innovation. In the words of BioEnterprise itself, we partner with people who have a passion for improving health and well-being. As a business incubator and accelerator, BioEnterprise helps scientists and entrepreneurs nurture new products and technologies, connecting them with the human capital and the financial resources that they need to bring in their ideas to market. Our speaker has over 25 years of experience in the healthcare, financial services, retail, IT, and consumer products industries. As CEO in residence at BioEnterprise, he is tasked with identifying, capitalizing, and growing a novel digital health company, while also serving as in-house resource to other entrepreneurs. Jim previously led BioEnterprise's business development efforts in the health, IT, and services sectors. Before that, he held a leadership position at HealthSync, a startup company in the health insurance marketplace, and also worked with Glengarry Ventures, which is a fund focusing on technology startups. Jim earned his BS degree from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School and his executive MBA from Case Weatherhead School of Management. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to Jim Weissman.
Okay, you guys can hear me?
Yeah.
Good morning, Rotarians.
Good morning.
I want to thank you very much for having me. George, thank you very much for inviting me back after my first failed attempt at coming here. I'm going to take a little bit of a different spin on health and wellness today. I'm going to talk, in addition to just general health and wellness, I'm going to talk a little bit about health and wellness of the local economy here in northeastern Ohio. So for those of you who are sort of reading the newspapers that come out twice a week, if that, and paying attention, there's some good news lately. Ohio has been one of the top states in the Midwest for venture capital investment, and that's a metric, venture capital investment, that we use to sort of take the pulse of how well we're doing economically. How well are we churning out startup companies, new growth companies, and for many of you, you know that many, or if not most of the job growth in the United States comes from small companies. And so in order for those small companies to sustain themselves early on, they oftentimes need venture capital. So we, as a measure, we like to see that venture capital is coming into the state, and it is. We're, again, one of the top states in the Midwest. Companies in the biomedical sector, specifically in northeastern Ohio, have raised at least $200 million in the last of the last 5 years, and actually if we count this year, we're nearing in. We think we might actually attain another $200 million a year, so we're looking at 5 out of the last 6. And 40 new companies in northeastern Ohio have raised private equity capital in the last 4 of the 5 years. So that means that we're churning out consistently more and more new companies. Now, I want to contrast that with what we were dealing with back in 2001. And as many of you know, that was sort of the era of the dot-com bust. We were in a little bit of a recession, not a major recession like we had later on in 2008, but it was still a recession. And northeastern Ohio was not doing very well. This time the recession hit us a little bit disproportionately, probably owing to the fact that we were still heavily reliant on manufacturing and industry. And those are the sectors that we've seen have not come back as robustly as some of the more advanced technology sectors. So things were not going well, to say the least. If you were reading the newspapers, you saw the topic was called the quiet crisis. And this basically was alluding to the fact that historically, probably going back to the 70s, we were in a slow decline that really wasn't visible as much as people would think, and therefore we were not really dealing with the issue directly. We were kind of hoping and praying maybe GM will come back and put another plant here. Maybe one of the steel companies will resurrect themselves. But we really weren't dealing with it. And so the plain dealer went on and called it the quiet crisis. And it's something that we needed to address. So a couple of leaders in our region, Mel Mixon and Bill Sanford, who had built fairly sizable and successful life science-related companies, took a look around and they said, what's going on here? We are a national leader in life sciences when you think about the clinical provision of care. So you can go to the Cleveland Clinic, and now it's the #2 hospital in the country, if not the world. You can go to university hospitals. You've got Summa Hospital System down this way. You've got great clinical care. You also have a tremendous amount of research being conducted. Case Western Reserve University is one of the leading research institutions in the country. I think it's over $200 million of research is conducted there annually. The Cleveland Clinic itself conducts a great amount of research. So we also looked at those two and we said, we also have some pretty good industry base here. There's a lot of imaging technology that was developed in northeastern Ohio. There are a lot of imaging-based companies that are still here. Some of them have been purchased, but the companies that purchased them remained, left the companies here and grew around them. So there's a lot going on, but it's really not enough, and it's not affecting our economy, and our economy is suffering. So we took a look and we said, here's the amount of venture investment, and again, we use venture investment as the metric for how well a region is doing. How much are they growing new startup companies that are going to replace those companies that are failing and fading? You can think about Silicon Valley as the kind of the preeminent yardstick for venture investment. Billions of dollars a year going into startup companies in Silicon Valley. And now we know all about those huge companies that are employing 30, 40, 50, 100,000 people. But our region, when you looked at investments into the life science companies, was lagging. We would do, on average, I think it was $20 million a year. In 2001, you can see we did $8 million and invested into only 5 companies. The following year was one of our better years. We had $33 million invested into only 6 companies. So we're not doing a good job of translating that clinical provision of care and that research into new companies. Other regions are doing this, Minneapolis, Research Triangle Park, and Boston, very much well known for their life science companies and the growth they were attaining there. So we set about, let's see if I can get this to go, we set about to try to change that. And that was the basis for bioenterprise. We worked with private industry and the institutions that are around the region, enhancing their tech transfer, creating venture capital funds itself, going out and soliciting entrepreneurs, and finding innovation in the community, not just innovation that's coming out of the institutions. We work with philanthropy. You guys are probably well aware that northeastern Ohio is a very philanthropic region. There are something like 600 philanthropic organizations, many of them making grants, many of them focusing on economic development. Unfortunately, it's a bad thing to have 600 different institutions making decisions, because oftentimes they make different decisions. So one group might give $25,000 to this organization to try to enhance the economy, while another group might give $5,000 over to someone else. So everyone's scrambling to try to attract the capital, and we're spreading it around like peanut butter, but we're spreading it rather thin. So an entity called the Fund for Our Economic Future was formed. This was 60 individual philanthropic organizations that all had interest in economic development. They pooled their capital, and right now they've pooled a total of $90 million, and they are actually going out and making what we call big bets. They're actually placing large amounts of capital into a small select group of organizations, and they're also agreeing to support those organizations for longer periods of time. So they're making grants that are 3 and 5 years in length. So that's helping to facilitate the type of work that we're doing, and I'll explain what we do in a few seconds. And then you had the public monies coming in. The state of Ohio to date has pooled about $2.3 billion under the Third Frontier program. And that money has gone towards, again, economic development initiatives. So what does this mean? Well, we know that we've got the backing of industry, we've got the backing of philanthropy, we've got the backing of the state. We want to set out, and this is 2002, to become a nationally recognized center for healthcare innovation. So here it is. We're trying to address the health and wellness of the economy by becoming a better healthcare innovation region. We benchmarked against those two regions I talked about, Research Triangle Park and also Minneapolis. And we looked at the singular measure of venture capital invested into companies. We used 2001 as our starting point, 33 million per year, roughly. Our goal was to see if we could increase that amount to 150 million. So what does that mean? $30 million coming into a region can support 4, 5, 6 companies a year, 4, 5, 6 companies. Maybe one will succeed out of that. And that one may grow. Hopefully it'll grow long enough to employ 50, 100, 200 people. And then the hope is that when they exit, that company will stay here. But there's no guarantee that'll happen. Well, if you can raise 150 million per year, you're now looking at 40, 50 companies, and maybe 6, 7, or 8 of them will succeed, and those companies will grow to 200 employees, and more likely than not, a few of those will actually stay in the region and continue to grow. And that will start impacting the health and well-being of our economy. So BioEnterprise, as an institution, partnered with all these different organizations. You can see the Burton D. Morgan Foundation, very much interested in entrepreneurship. They're one of our big supporters, and they're located down in this area. But we also reached out across the region. So most of the hospitals are involved with us. Most of the institutions of higher learning are involved with us. And then there's other economic development organizations as well that we partner with. So this entrepreneurial ecosystem, as we like to say, has a singular focus, and that is growing life science companies. I'm not going to get into the details of this chart, but what we set out to do, and what I do on a daily basis, is what we call the market back approach, and you can see that on the bottom of the slide. We actually have another term for that. We say we cheat on the exam. And by that I mean, at the end of that slide, you can see the key there is access to capital. Companies, in order to grow, need money. It's their lifeblood. They can have the most brilliant ideas with the most brilliant individuals, but if they don't have the money to execute on the plans, they're not going to go anywhere. So capital becomes their lifeblood. Well, Northeastern Ohio does not have a lot of venture capital sitting by the sideline waiting to invest in these companies. Most of that money is sitting on the coasts. Most of it is on the West Coast, but there's a nice large chunk of it sitting up in the Boston and New York area. There's also a lot of venture capitalists kind of spread throughout the rest of the country. We needed access to them. The only way you get access to their money is if you can give them investment opportunities that they want. So we would go out and we would talk to these VCs and we would ask them, what do you want to invest into? And the VCs would tell us, and that would give us the information. That would give us the answer to the exam, and we could go back and we could work with companies in 2 different ways. So BioEnterprise is a not-for-profit entity. We are partnered with the Cleveland Clinic, University Hospitals, Case Western Reserve University, and the Summa Hospital System. And our mission is to grow life science companies in Northeastern Ohio, plain and simple. The metric, again, that we use is how much venture capital can we bring into these companies. And we have a very unique operating model. We provide 2 buckets of services. So the first thing we do is we try to find companies that we think are going to fit the investment interests of the venture community. And we work with them on their business plan. We work with them on their strategy. We work with them on their market assessment. We work with them on their competitive analysis. We work with them on their financial model. We'll do anything it takes to help build a better business. I've got a stack of resumes in my office from people who are interested in working with startups. We'll try to align them with the right startup company. A company might come out from an entrepreneur in the area, and he might say, you know, in order for this to get a little bit further, I need to have clinical feedback. We'll go partner him with the right clinician at one of these institutions. So we'll do anything on the business development side that it takes to make these companies appropriate for venture investment. The second thing that we do is we try to engage them with the right investors. So there are hundreds of venture capital investors across the country. They're not all looking for the same thing. If you, as a startup company, go out and try to reach out to all those VCs, you're going to spend a lot of time talking with people who really aren't interested in what you're trying to sell. We try to align the investors that we know with the opportunities that we know from our region. So we spend about half of our time working with the venture community and working with the startups and just coordinating them, aligning them. The other half of the time we spend working with the companies, preparing them, making them better, making them appropriate for the next stage, which is that venture investment. So that's that market-back approach. Now, what's unique about how BioEnterprise operates, we're a small organization, there's about 17 professionals. Again, we're a not-for-profit. We are what some people call an incubator or an accelerator. That's not really the proper term for us. But what we do is we provide these services completely for free. We don't charge anybody for the services we're providing. So the companies we're working with, our goal is to grow as many of them as possible. The best way to grow a business and to help a business is to not charge it when you're providing them services. Because as soon as you charge them services, that's capital outflow. They need capital in. So we don't want to charge them for our services. Secondly, we don't take equity in these companies. Equity is sort of the coin of the realm for a venture investor. They're going to give you their capital, but they want equity back. And they don't like to see other people taking equity away from these companies, because that means that potentially either they're not going to generate as much of a return as they could, or members of management won't own as much of the company. And if they don't own as much of the company, there's a chance that maybe they won't be as interested in growing it as aggressively as they could if they had a larger ownership stake. So we don't take any equity in these companies. So we are what we call completely non-dilutive to the company. So the question there that most people then ask us is, well, how do you make money? How do you survive? We don't take any fees for the services. We don't take any equity. The way we survive is because we're generating these great new startup companies that are growing. The institutions that we're partnered with are very happy to see this growth because it means it's a healthy economy for the region. And they continue to fund us as long as we can continue to provide this return on their investment. So 14 years later, BioEnterprise has now been doing this for 14 years. What do we have? Well, the first two bars on this chart actually echo the two bars that I showed you on that earlier chart. There's the $8 million and the $33 million invested in 2001 and 2002. That represented, again, I think it was 5 and 6 companies receiving capital. As you follow along the chart, you can see the last 4 years on that chart, 2016, 15, 14, and 13, and actually 2012. You can go back. You can see the numbers are now over $200 million a year. We actually had a nice little peak there at $398 million of growth capital coming in, and that was to over 50 startup companies in the life sciences. Those companies range everything from biotech companies. I was just talking earlier about a new technology called CRISPR-Cas. It's a biotech technology that lets people edit their genes. So that means that a company can go in and they can find a disease that is affected by the genes that an individual has, and they actually are developing now the technologies to go and edit your gene to remove the defective genes and replace them with better genes. And that will hopefully then either stop the progression of a disease or prevent the disease from occurring. Now, it's an early stage technology. We don't actually have any companies in that space right now, but we have companies that are starting to look into the technology and thinking about how they could use it. So we have biotech companies, we have pharmaceutical companies we work with, we have medical device companies that we work with. If you think about all the orthopedic and cardiology that goes on at the places like the Cleveland Clinic, there's a lot of ideas that come out of there related to cardiology and orthopedics. We also have, and these are the companies that I work with, these are the information technology companies and also the service companies. So the software that you now see your physician using when you go to the office, the electronic medical record and all the other technology that they're incorporating into their practice, those are the companies that we're working with. About 50% of the companies we work with are medical device related companies. 25% are the biotech and pharma companies, and about 25% are the information technology and service businesses. That sector, however, is the fastest growing sector. So we have more of those startups occurring on an annual basis, and it's accelerating. Those are also the companies that we see growing the largest. So The two biggest successes I want to point to, and there's probably another chart here that'll show some of them, but a company called Explorus here in the region was a spin out from the Cleveland Clinic. It's a software company that handles big data, just means large amounts of data that are coming from all this technology. They recently sold to IBM. They've grown to over 200 people in the region. IBM has partnered them with their Watson technology. So for those of you who remember the Jeopardy contest between the Watson computer and the human, and Watson trounced the humans, that technology has been partnered with the Explorus technology, and now that is being grown here in northeastern Ohio. Another company called Cover My Meds has grown to over 400 employees. Now, unfortunately, most of those employees are actually their technology back office, and they're located down in Columbus. Still a win for the state, but not quite northeastern Ohio. That company recently sold for $1.1 billion to McKesson Corporation. McKesson is going to grow that business here in northeastern Ohio and down in Columbus. So we consider that a huge win. Those are the types of things that this economy needs. So here we have it again, the numbers in summary. So between 2001 and 2005, this region brought in about $300 million of growth capital. Pretty good, ahead of the curve for what we were seeking. The next 5 years, we brought in almost $700 million. And in the last 5 years, we are now at $1.35 billion of growth capital. We'll be reporting the 2017 numbers in about 2 months. So we'll see where those come out. This is just sort of a quick snapshot, and I can't even read it from where I am, so I don't expect you guys to be able to read it. But it shows where Cleveland, that little yellow arrow now, is compared to what's going on around the country. And if you look sort of the first few columns here, you can see our numbers are pretty dramatic, and outside of maybe 2 or 3 other regions in the country, we are actually leading the way now in life science investments. So we're doing a tremendous job. I'm going to quickly go through a few slides here. So these are the exits I was talking about, a couple of them. Company up top there is a service-based business called Envision RX. They actually sold for over $2 billion to Rite Aid and Walgreens. You've got Explorus, as I mentioned, Cover My Meds, I mentioned, a medical device company that was grown here at Case Western Reserve University and then sold to Medtronic, called Cardio Insight. They actually have a technology, they put a vest on you. It's a rather tight-fitting vest. That vest has 256 sensors on it, and it can actually, in real time, map the electrical properties of your heart. And that is being used in ablation procedures so that as they are going in and trying to correct an arrhythmia of your heart, in real time they can see what's happening with the electrical signals that are traveling around your heart. And so that lets them make the correct ablations to your heart so that they can correct the abnormalities and get you in and out of a procedure much faster. So that company actually, again, technology was grown here. The company is now continuing to grow here. Medtronic has made additional investments. So the health and well-being of our region is improving because we've decided to focus on life sciences. We've taken 15 years now, and we have grown, I think, something on the order of 240 or more successful companies in the region. We have about 120 of them still active. Some have been sold, some have gone out of business after a period of time, some have morphed into other businesses or sort of changed what they've done, but we still have quite a number of successful life science companies, and we're continuing to grow that, and we're moving forward with all that. So not going to get into some of the eye charts that we do have, but in summary, I do want to point out that the region, northeastern Ohio, has become a hotbed for life science companies. BioEnterprise is only one of the institutions that are helping to promote that growth. There are other economic development groups in the region that are helping. Amongst them is an organization called Jumpstart. We have Team NEO, we have Magnet. But with the focus on life sciences and with our singular focus on working with life science companies, we like to think that we're leading the charge. We do have some challenges, though. Growing these companies is great, but unfortunately these companies need a lot of employees with very high technical skills. And so right now we're actually working with the school systems around the state and around the region, and we're trying to develop more students who will have the right skills as they come out of high school and as they come out of the institutions of higher learning, and they can step into these roles. Right now, we're importing a lot of individuals. Cleveland, fortunately, has become a place where people want to live. And so that's becoming easier and easier, but you still have to compete with the coast. You still have to compete with salary ranges from New York and Boston and San Francisco that are a little bit higher than ours. So the more local talent we can develop, the better off we will be. On that, I just want to sort of open it up for any questions, if you have, about bioenterprise in general, about the region, what's going on in the life sciences, about anything else health and wellness focused. But I'll leave it open to the floor.
Also, by definition, Jim, you have to work with a lot of scientists and clinicians who come up with these brilliant ideas. And then you've got to somehow turn these people into businessmen and women. How do you do that?
That's actually probably the hardest aspect of the business that we have. So there are those individuals who are willing to listen and who are good learners, and they're willing to hear what you have to say. They take it all in, and they actually do the things you suggest to them. We found that one of the challenges we actually have is the fact that we don't charge for our services, that we're free. People don't tend to listen to you as well as if you're actually charging them. If you're a consultant who's charging them a lot of money, they think, I better listen because I'm paying a lot of money for this. So it's an interesting little challenge we have. But we've seen over time, and we've learned, how do you work with that type of an entrepreneur, the scientist? We also try to encourage many of them to bring in other management. We tell them, look, you're better suited to be the chief technology officer here, or the chief scientific officer, or the chief medical officer, whatever it might be. You need a real manager to come in who understands how to grow a business, who understands how to attract the capital that they need to grow the business. So it's often this challenge of convincing the individual, one, what do you need to do to become a better manager, but two, can you also convince them that maybe they need a better manager? We do have individuals, though, who I will say are brilliant. They're scientists, and they come out and they're great managers. And it's up to us to recognize that early enough and let them have that runway. So it's a learning experience, though. The first time you go in, I think your assumption is this person is not going to be a manager. We got to change it. But you can't fight City Hall sometimes. So.
Do you work only with businesses that are already kind of up and going, or do you work with folks who have an idea and say, I want to figure out whether or not this is viable?
Yeah, and that's actually a good question. So early on, when we opened the doors, we pretty much took anyone. If you had an idea, if you were already doing later stage $20 million of revenue, we brought you in. And the reality is the venture community is very narrowly focused on what they want to invest into. So we have to bring companies in that fit their profile. So if you're very early stage, you're just an idea on a napkin, we have to assess whether or not that is far enough along for the VC to start having interest. And we like to bring you in 18 to 24 months before you need that first chunk of capital, because it takes time to properly prepare and actually raise the money. So for some companies, a napkin is fine. For others, we go back and we tell them, you need to have $2 million of revenue before a VC is going to be interested in you. We then point them to other resources in the region. So the Lorain Community College has a program called GLIDE. It's an economic development organization that works with very, very early stage entities, and they will make $25,000 loans and $25,000 grants, and then subsequently a $100,000 loan to a company that is just trying to get that idea off the napkin a little bit further along. So we will realize when it's appropriate for you to work with us, and if we can't help you, we'll try to point you to the right resources. There's a... I'm right here. Oh.
Hey, Jim. So you mentioned that some of these companies that are successful stay in the region, and you work to keep them here locally in Northeast Ohio. Is there anything that these local organizations that are funding grants and helping these companies get started, is there anything that they build into their deals to keep companies here? I mean, what can they do to...
Yeah, it's a good question. That has not... So that's been looked at. And the challenge you have with that is as soon as you put limitations or parameters on either the capital or the support you're going to give a company, it narrows both the companies that will be willing to work with you, and it narrows the interests of the outside investment community to want to work with the company. Because to them, they need to maximize, so again, the VCs, the outside capital, they need to maximize their return. They've got people who have given them money, who have said to them, look, I'm giving you this money now, I might not give you more money unless you produce a big enough return for me. So they're going out, they're looking at an opportunity, and they've got thousands of different companies to look at. And they're going to compare those companies, and if one of them has a restriction that says, you can't leave northeastern Ohio, and the VC looks at that and says, well, that might restrict your growth. That might limit your ability to maximize my return. They'll go to the other investments and they'll say, look, I'll invest in you. So we've encouraged the other entities that are making these grants or investments, don't put restrictions on the companies. We just have to have the faith that we're doing enough and we're doing the right things that we can keep these companies here and help them grow and help them remain in this region. We're not perfect. Luckily, no other region is perfect. As much as people talk about Silicon Valley, try buying a house in Silicon Valley on any salary. You can't. A bungalow is $2 million. And even if you're making $200,000 a year at Google, you still can't afford that house. You're living in an apartment with 3 other people who you don't even know, perhaps. So we have advantages. We have to play up those advantages, and we have to figure out how to maximize those and then minimize any limitation that we put on them.
Jim, it seems to me that the future of medical attention to health is entirely in converting from cure to prevention. And you brought up CRISPR, which I think is the most exciting element in perhaps future prevention, but that's not in Northeast Ohio. Do we have anybody that's even competitive in that CRISPR genetic modification area?
Well, the good news is the CRISPR-Cas technology is basically being licensed out to other companies. There's a couple of legal battles that are going on right now about who actually invented CRISPR and who has the rights to CRISPR. But the good thing is we see that as something that's going to be licensed out and other companies can take advantage of and then build their solutions around that. So the hope is that some of the research that's going on at Case Western or the clinic or anywhere else, they will take advantage of that CRISPR-Cas technology by licensing it and using that to then develop a solution. But I will even say that as exciting as CRISPR-Cas is, you have to realize that health and wellness, a large chunk of it is determined outside of the clinical provision of care. And it's the social determinants of health that people are starting to take a focus on. And it's the things outside of the novel pharmaceutical or biotech or medical device that are actually having even more impact. We just don't know how to deal with them yet.
Speaking of the whole Northeast Ohio region, this new world of natural gas that is developing, again, this isn't particularly on this, but it affects the whole region. Are you starting, people in your field starting to see interest in the different cost structure in Northeast Ohio and this region due to the much lower cost of natural gas?
It hasn't come up yet. But we look to places like Buffalo, where they have low cost of electricity due to the Niagara Falls and the power generation in that region, and they've been able to leverage that to help companies that need large amounts of electricity or want just cheap electricity, and they can foster growth around that. Right now, we haven't seen that being a major point of impact for the life science companies. There's a chance that some of the imaging companies may get to that level. There's a lot of services now that are being provided remotely. And to the extent that you can provide a service remotely and leverage the low cost of electricity in any specific region or the low cost of communications or whatever it might be, then you might start to see companies looking and saying, hey, I really want to be in an area where I know I've got a low cost of fuel to produce my whatever it might be, my imaging technology, and I've got access to good infrastructure. We still tout the fact that northeastern Ohio is within, I think, 600 miles of over 50% of the U.S. population. That's still a benefit. So getting the stuff from point A to point B is still a big issue. So being able to manufacture it in northeastern Ohio is still a benefit. And so maybe then you'll start to see a little bit more. But I think we don't have the scale quite yet that really would play to that.
Yeah, you have two members of the school board here, so. One's not working the camera, the other's working the mic. And so we're both interested, sort of perked up when you mentioned about encouraging technical careers among those biomedical in high school. What sort of programs or things are you encouraging?
So about 2 years ago, BioEnterprise took a leadership role in convening 3 different groups of institutions, you could say. We talked with and this is convening that was funded by the Cleveland Foundation with a focus on information technology. And so we convened the institutions of higher learning, we convened the corporations who are growing, and we actually then convened sort of the other entities that are involved and along the way, and that's sort of the Cleveland Foundations and other not-for-profits. But when we initially focused on the institutions for higher learning, we also started seeing interest from the Cleveland school system, Akron school system, and other school systems from K through 12. And what we've been doing, and again, this is only a convening, we're not proposing a grand solution, but we're trying to get these entities to talk. So the companies that are growing, tell these institutions of higher learning, what are your needs? What are you looking for? What type of student are you willing to hire? What skill sets should they have? And there's a lot of talk about STEM education that's been going on for a while. This is really trying to narrow the focus. So we know that bioinformatics, we know that big data analytics, we know that certain math skills, they're very important and they're in short supply. There was an analysis done about the number of data scientists, true data scientists that exist in the United States, and it's an incredibly small number. And Northeastern Ohio has very few of them, and actually one company, Explorus, IBM Watson now, has I think it's 2 of the 6 that we can identify in Northeastern Ohio. We need more. So this conversation is going on back and forth. We're hoping that the K through 12 schools will start to develop different programs, educate their students about the options that they might have, the opportunities that are at these companies. The companies, we want them to communicate more and more, tell us what your needs are. If you tell us, at least we have a fighting chance of developing those individuals. It's going to be something that may take a generation, though. It may take another 10, 12 years till we can get an alignment and the proper numbers to match up to really support the growth that we're seeing.
Thank you, Jim. Fascinating topic and very interesting and very exciting for the region and for the nation, quite frankly. I'd like to thank the greeters today, Dan Filbert and Doug McDowell, as well as the audiovisual crew that makes possible sharing these meetings with the community. Tom Page, Tom Tobin, James Field, and Ron Barnhouse, and Den Rich, always at the ready at a moment's notice to fill in when we need. Today's Rotobuck. The payout is $10 and the jackpot is $222. Jim, if you would. The last 4, 9674. 9674. Ah.
I threw out all the other tickets. Nope. Thank you.
Okay, next week's speaker will be Greg McNeil. He may be known to some of you. Greg is a local businessman, Hudson citizen, and the founder of Cover 2 Resources. It's a very, very exciting and very important effort that he has launched dealing with the opioid addiction crisis. So I think it'll be a very fascinating program next week as well. Just a couple of thoughts to leave you with this morning. The first, from a former U.S. president. A nation, as a society, forms a moral person, and every member of it is personally responsible for his society. Thomas Jefferson. And from one of the great American authors, keep away from people who try to belittle your ambitions. Small people always do that, but the really great make you feel that you too can become great. Mark Twain. And with that, we're adjourned. See everybody next week.